Hello, Silver friends. This is Joli from Quicksilver Hair, and this is the Silver Thread. Katie is not with us today because she is unpacking from her major move, but I have a special guest from London, England, Miss Karla Osborne. Karla is a gray hair blending specialist, and when I found her, I started to absorb all of her content and wanted to know more. So she graciously accepted an invitation to do an interview with me and answer some of your questions about gray blending. So hello, Karla. Welcome to the Silver
Thread. Hi, Joli. Thank you so much for having me.
You're most welcome. I mean, I'm glad you wanted to do this with us because it was something that I have a lot of questions about. And my experience in the salon, even though I'm not a stylist, I have worked in salons, but I have been out of that world for like 20 years. So there's things that are more modern and more modern ways to do things. And so I'm kind of out of touch with that now. So I was really excited to talk to you and get the modern, fresh take on gray blending. So to get us started, tell me about what drew you to helping women embrace their natural gray hair.
It's quite selfish, but initially it was to combat my own white hair. I noticed that the white hairs were coming in, and at the time I was working on my own. I wasn't in a high street salon, so I was just touching up my own roots between clients where I was going to people's houses. And I started to think, I don't want to get stuck like my grandma, who's actually still box dyes her hair and she's as dark as I am and she's 83 years old. That I didn't want. So I started to experiment with different colors on my hair and started doing research and realized there's a whole gray blending theme out there. Mm-hmm. And that was something that selfishly I wanted to get myself on board initially. And then I started to see the positives in actually, why are we coloring our hair? Why do we feel the need to? Why can men get away with going gray? And it just kind of spiraled.
Right.
Before, and a lot of my clients, a lot of my traditional clients were middle-aged women at the time. So white hair was becoming a problem for them. And it was a conversation I found myself constantly having and actually looking at alternatives, because I knew I didn't have the capacity to keep coming back every 3 weeks to do their roots, because I had other people on my books at the time. So it was like, how can I get them to go a bit longer so that I can still tend to my other guests, right?
Right.
So yeah, this is, a few years ago now, and it just started there. And that's, how I started exploring Demi permanence and different methods and techniques to blend in that white hair.
And I think that to your point of a few years ago, the trend really skyrocketed through the pandemic, because when the salons closed, there was many women that discovered they had hair that they actually liked. Like, they didn't know that there was something underneath all of that permanent dye that was something they thought about embracing. So I think that you kind of stepped in just the right place, because like when I did this 10 years ago, really nobody knew what gray blending was. I knew what it was, like I said, because I had worked in salons and I knew what the services were and everything. But I would call around to salons and they didn't know what I was talking about. They had no idea, like, I can use, they would tell me color services that were, permanent color. And I had to no, that's not what I'm looking for.
That's why it keeps you in, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I ended up doing box dye for a long time before I gave it up altogether. And I think that was kind of what pushed me over the edge, was like, I just can't do this anymore. It's just like, it was just too much. So tell me, what is gray blending?
Gray blending, it can mean something different for every head of hair. But for most of the guests that I work with, it's about moving away from the heavy artificial hair color and moving into something more natural and blended and softer. I think as your white hair comes through at the root here, if you are in a rut where you've been coloring your hair so dark, say, the contrast between the two is quite stark, because you've got a flat color coming up against another. It's black and white, isn't it? The two are coming together. So I want to break that line with gray blending and almost move some of the white hair that is going to come in at the root naturally and put those strands down into the lengths. So you can still have your hair colored and feel polished. It's not about going completely gray unless that's what a client wants to do. It's about helping them fight that root problem, fight that line of demarcation by mimicking the white hair from here and putting it into their coloured hair down the bottom. Therefore, when that white root does come through, it's a blend. From there, once they've got comfortable with seeing white hair, actually the white hair doesn't really become the problem anymore. They're comfortable with it. They've gotten used to seeing it and probably would have had lots of compliments. And then from there, it's a nice, easy spot to transition to where you've gotten yourself to, Joli.
Okay, so to clarify for me, here back in the day, there's people in my demographic that are over 60, 70, and so forth that remember the process called frosting their hair. And it was a semi-highlight type thing. You would go through a cap so that you got little tiny threads of hair rather than big chunky blocks.
Yeah.
And my mother did it when she was going gray. She did frosting. And when I decided to embrace my hair, when I decided to embrace my gray hair, I had a pretty distinct demarcation line because it was this very light color against a dark red that was permanent. So I had a very distinct line, and that line did bother me. Fortunately, I have curly hair, so it kind of blended. And I went through this crazy process of trying to find somebody that would do gray blending. And I finally had to just say, would you do double lowlights? Because I could, if I said gray blending, they didn't know what I was talking about. So I went in at about the 5th month mark of growing my hair out. So I had a pretty good chunk of white grown out and had double lowlights done. So when you do gray blending, tell me is it lowlights, highlights, lowlights, and,
Yeah, it's a combination. And what I've discovered is most people's white pattern varies. Some people can have a block of white here, but still have a lot of their natural depth in certain areas. A lot, a lot of people it's around the hairline, but actually underneath here, they're still very, very dark.
Which is very normal. And I want to point that out because a lot of people, they don't know that that's back there. And so then they start growing their hair out and they have no idea, which is part of the reason why some of like the overnight transitions can fail because it's not accounting for that darker color. So you're matching the light and the dark the best you can.
Yeah. So wherever they have more white hair, that's where we pack in some highlights. And I wouldn't do, so if you heard of the highlights and then a tint in between the highlights, or you can have highlights and lowlights and no tint in between. So you've got two options. So if somebody is under 50% white hair, so they've still got a lot of depth remaining, and they have 50% white hair, you would do a Demi in between them highlights to put the depth back into the hair.
I see. Okay.
Because they're under 50%, you're not running a risk of creating a demarcation line.
Right.
If somebody was over 50%, say as white as you are on your root, and I painted a Demi in between my foils, it'll give you a line, right? Because you're so white. Whereas if I low light through there, like baby low lights, it's soft and subtle, and that will blend in with the other color that we put through. Now, you might only do that for a few visits, a few appointments, until more of your white hair comes through. And then we start dropping out the low lights because we want to like embrace where you are, right? What you have there. So
it's a gradual process of several.
Absolutely. I work over a 6 to 9 month journey. So my guests, if they're doing it with me, will pay one fee where everything is included. And they're not paying per appointment. They're paying to get to the end goal.
Okay. So that's a good thing to point out because there's a lot of people that do have to be concerned about the financial aspect of it. And that is one of my questions about how much does it cost? Of course, for you, it's going to be a different charge than say somebody in the United States, or depending on if somebody owns their own salon or rents a booth So we can't really answer how much does it cost, but we can answer the reason it costs so much.
Love to.
Okay.
So I charge one fee. And you're not paying per appointment because some people will only need 3 appointments and some people might need 10. You're paying for the result. I am solving the problem that you have and I'm providing the solution to get you to a grey blend, which means going longer between your appointments. Everything is included: cuts, colors, smoothing blow dries. So I spoke to you before about the hyaluronic acid blow dry that I do.
Mm-hmm.
Adds moisture and nourishment into the hair, and I think that's a really nice starting point for anyone with white hair. Certainly if they lay out, you know, different coarse, wiry from their pigmented hair. So everything is included, and it's step by step. You do a couple of big appointments, see how they feel, how did that grow out, how did it fade. Certainly if you're working with someone that was previously highlighted with blonde hair and you put in a darker tint back in, that will often cause a bit of fade over time, or maybe you're going through the summer months. So we work just over a 6 to 9 month period until we get to a stage where we're mutually happy. There's not much more I could have done to create even more longevity at this point, and we're managing to go 10, 12 weeks before anything needs to happen, maybe a toner or some more lowlights or something.
Okay.
So you're moving them away from the 3 and 4 weekly appointments.
I mentioned the overnight gray transition, and you're telling me now that with the way you do this over this long period of time, it is not the overnight gray transition. What is that difference? What is the overnight gray transition?
That is, have you heard of Jack Martin?
Yes.
Stylist out in the States, right? He's renowned for doing a 12-hour appointment and transitioning somebody in one day. My thoughts on this is it's quite aggressive to the hair. And if someone, if someone has been artificially coloring their hair for 15, 20, sometimes more years, that's a huge transition for someone. It's a shock to them.
Yes, that is one thing we talk about with growing it out cold turkey, is that if you're not used to something in your appearance happening very rapidly, it's not a good idea to do an overnight transition, because it will put you in shock, and it can be quite psychologically detrimental. You might feel really bad about it because it's so drastically different. You know, you wake up one morning and you look one way, and the next morning you look completely different.
Your hair will feel different as well, right? Because it's had a lot of service in one day. Your scalp will be tender as well.
Okay.
I don't do them, but I imagine a lot of lightener is being used, bleach, and that will cause some fade. There will be fade after that, and I don't know how the stylists that do that service then manage the it won't look like the same. It won't look like day one on day 35.
Right. As I understand it, they use toners to correct all that, but I don't know how often they do that, or how much more financial burden it becomes to, you know, I know that some toners only last a couple of washes versus a couple of months. So I guess it really depends on, you know, what's happening there. But okay, so that tells me kind of what the overnight process difference is with gray blending.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have a question from a viewer that was, I don't want to be gray, but I also don't want to color every month. So is gray blending a good solution?
Yes. Gray blending for this type of person, someone who maybe they just feel too young to go gray, not that you can really put an age on it, but they just, to them, not ready for it, but equally don't want the monthly maintenance of having their hair colored. So gray blending is a middle ground. It's a nice sweet spot, a bit of a sidestep, create a blend, creating longevity between your appointments, and perhaps you'll then become comfortable with seeing some of that white hair, you know.
Okay. I think that is something that I wished I could have done, because like I said, I was doing permanent box dye and I just got sick of it. It was just it had no dimension, it had no depth, it was just really flat. We have a saying here based on an old movie, Steel Magnolias, that I looked like I had a brown football helmet on, and it just, you had helmet head, you know, you had this like solid shape of hair, and I just couldn't stand it. So I could see how you know, even though when I wasn't ready to do it, I kept dyeing my hair, and I would grow it out a little bit and see where it was, and then I would go back to dyeing it, where in that phase of my decision-making process, it would have been so much easier to do something like this, to have the gray blending done. And I would have been a lot less wishy-washy, I think, about what my hair color was and how I was dealing with the dyeing process. So I think, in my opinion, having helped people transition, and I'm talking thousands of people at this point, I think this is an incredibly good solution for if you're just not sure, but you don't really want to keep dyeing your hair all the time. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, it's a bit of a compromise. It's middle ground, and it's also a bit like choose your suffering. So you work with your grey hair as one option, or you don't, and you're constantly colouring it, which is what you know at the moment, and that's what you know, and that's what you're unhappy with. So your roots aren't going anywhere. You have to make a change. The colour has to change.
Yeah. And I think you made a very good point, and this is something that I talk about often, is that you have to choose your battle. You have to pick the battle that you're willing to go with. I often say this in regards to the length of the hair or to curls, because there's a lot of times people ditch the dye and they want to embrace their curly hair also, or they want to grow their hair out really long. So it's really like pick each battle. Like for me, it was get the dye off and then grow it out, because I wanted long silver hair. And I knew that if I tried to do length with dye and, ditching the dye at the same time with that demarcation, coming way down here and the ends being dry and old and damaged from dye, I just couldn't handle it. I chose healthy hair first. I chose ditch the dye second. And I chose length once the dye was completely cut off. So I think that this is another little place where you can pick that battle and then, work to the end goal slowly. There's no rush, right? I mean, you don't have to get there tomorrow.
And enjoy the journey.
Yeah.
Enjoy it, embrace it, and enjoy it.
So that is a good question. How do you know when you're ready for embracing your gray or having the gray blending process done?
I think if you're somebody who is frustrated at only enjoying their hair color for 10 days before you start to notice some contrasting going on here, and then you start reaching for a root spray or the hair makeup to cover it over for the next 3 weeks until your next appointment, that's a bit of a sign for me. Or you're somebody who don't go on holiday or go to a party or a celebration unless you've had your roots colored beforehand. Well, I don't think we should be living life like that.
Yeah.
Like, it's really sad.
Agreed.
Yeah. Or maybe life changes. So you're having kids and you know that you can't keep up that financial burden of going to the salon every 3-4 weeks, or even having childcare to be able to do that. So having kids is a big one. And I think milestones going through a divorce is like, some women want to change their appearance. Or maybe the husband was not on board with white hair and made her feel that she needed to cover that up.
Yeah.
So I think life changes, retirement is a good one. You're coming out of earning a regular income. So you're forward planning. What do you want your future to look like? And if it's not going to the salon every 3 or 4 weeks, then gray blending is an option, just to create longevity. And remember, it's not going gray. It's just erasing that line so that you can go longer.
So I was noticing my white streak here. I pulled that out. That was the first thing I did. I pulled that out from the dye process because I'm not kidding, within 3 days of permanent dye, I could see white hair.
Yeah.
Because it was resistant to dye. So that's another reason, is as your hair becomes whiter, some white hair is very resistant to dye, and that 10 days gets shortened. It gets shorter and shorter. And you can find yourself frustrated with it just a week after you've dyed it. So I think that's one, reason also, is that your hair becomes dye resistant. One of the other deciding factors for me was the women in my family live an incredibly long time. My grandmother died at 96 years old. And when she died, I was thinking about, I have another 50 years of this, and I'm already 80% gray, and I'm going, I don't think I want to do this for 50 years. I don't want this, just be whatever it is, instead of fighting that battle for another 2, 3, 4, 5 decades, So I think that's a
reality.
Right?
Yeah, because your white hair is going to keep coming.
Yep, it's going to keep coming. It isn't going to change. So if you go through this whole process, either you've done just the gray blending process, or you get all the way to where I'm at, what do you do if you don't like it?
Put some lipstick on. Right? Doesn't that solve everybody's problem?
Yes, ma'am. No.
Honestly, worst case scenario, you go back to color, right? Or you try and enhance where you're at. So you work out your pain points. What is it you're not enjoying? And try and tweak trying to still avoid permanent hair dye personally, because you put yourself back into the cycle unless you're ready to go back into that cycle. You've chosen your suffering and you know that's what you want. But I would still look at Demi permanence, soft, sheer, translucent coverage, and work out your pain point and fix that.
Okay.
Maybe you've got to where like you are, but you feel like your hair is flat, right? And you think, well, I don't want to put color in my hair because I've come this far. But there are so many methods of still coloring someone's hair who's already transitioned to gray that are still low maintenance. And maybe annually you'd need to have a top up or something, but you can balance out white hair with something.
So like if you had solid white where you didn't have, I have dimension because I still have brown mixed into my hair and I still have streaks, of course. So if, for instance, if my hair was completely white and flat and I wasn't really happy with it, I could go in and do what, like baby lowlights?
Yeah. So you, again, it's about the product, I think, and the placement. So you wouldn't put lowlights across here, right? Because you're just going to end up with stripes. And
Right.
That's artificial. You want to add depth where the hair would naturally be darker. So the sun would naturally hit here.
Right.
And around the hairline. So you want to almost put the depth in panels under here.
Underneath.
So white hair lays on top of it. And as you have, a bit of movement or a gust of wind or something, or you put some waves in your hair, you've got the dimension. It's almost faking the illusion of texture dimension in the hair. So it's about placement and then the type of product, because we don't want to give you a solid line. So
right.
Still use a Demi, soft sheer coverage.
I'm thinking of a woman right now that she was one of the door people at Costco. And I always saw her and always admired her because she had beautiful white, very long, almost to her knees, straight hair. And it was very white. And I went in one day and she had lowlights done, but they were really chunky and it was very stripy looking. It looked cool in its own way, right? But I thought, wow, I don't think I would want that big a chunk. So I think that's important to distinguish that it should be, to make it look more natural, be very small pieces and be well blended into what your natural hair would look like if it still had pigment.
Thinking about where the depth would be naturally. And for most of us, it's inside.
Okay. So you can do the processing, the gray blending process on any color hair, including white.
Yes. So if you're naturally white as you are at the root, and maybe you're as dark as me artificially, there will need to be some compromise. You cannot gray blend and stay as dark as me when you're as white as you are naturally, right? Because you're going to need to either compromise on maintenance, so that is probably still going to look like a 3 or 4 weekly root color, or you compromise on the level of lift. So yes, you could continue to identify as a brunette, but you're going to have lighter strands in there overall.
Okay.
Can't just be as dark as I am.
It kind of almost becomes like this reverse processing where you're coloring the white hair, not to color it completely, but to just kind of keep that blend going.
Yes.
So even if you were completely, grown out to white and you wanted that, it's still an option to do just gray blending. Okay. Yeah. I wanted to know, and I wanted to understand, so this is my question. What does bleach do to gray hair? So if you were to bleach my hair, what would it do to it?
It would make it feel even drier than it might already feel at the moment. Okay. Bleach is designed to break down the pigment in the hair. Now, we know that white hair has lost its pigment, and that's why it's become white now. So bleach does still, it's like my dog and your dog.
Yeah, they're talking to each other.
My door went, so my dog went. And using a lightener on the bleach, using a bleach on white hair will still have an effect. It does somehow lift it somehow, because there's no pigment to be lifted, but it does look different. So whether it's just staining it slightly, because a lot of the lighteners that I use have a toner built into them, lifts and tones at the same time. So I would say it likely tones it as it lifts it, but you can't actually lift it because there's nothing to lift out of it.
Okay. So my experience with, and this is something that I've had to tell people, there is a trend going around in the United States for, if you have yellowing on your naturally white hair in the salon, they want to bleach that. But bleaching that, using bleach on yellowing white hair will make it more yellow. It doesn't whiten it. Because
No.
like you're talking about is that the bleach is still, it's still processing the hair and altering it. It is
Yeah.
not whitening, it's not a clarifying, and it won't remove like oxidative stress, for instance. It's actually going to make that worse.
So you'll probably be better. You might know better on this because
Okay.
you work with a lot of yellowing on white hair. When I've worked with yellowing on naturally white hair, I've used products that were like chelating products,
Right.
clarifying products.
Right.
I would only use a lightener. I don't even think I would go in on a lightener because if anyone's got yellowing, it tends to be on the ends, and this is most fragile, and would be compromised. And I personally wouldn't go in with a lightener. I would look at my clarifying products to clean up the hair.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's really the point I wanted to find if I was on track with that in my own advice for people is to avoid bleach if you have naturally white hair and you're looking to brighten it. That is not the way to brighten it because that will end up with it being worse off than it was before you started.
Yeah, and the condition and more of the texture because it swells the cuticle, right? It's alkaline, it's going to swell the cuticle. It's not even good for a cleanse. You know, some people would do like a bleach bath. Yeah, I'm not even sure that's a good idea. In case you accidentally still have pigmented hair in with your white hair, then you're going to turn your pigmented hair orange.
And that also leads to that if you are bleaching your white hair, and the damage that causes to the cuticle, it will actually draw more things to it that will discolor it because that cuticle
will fall out.
And the cuticle's raised and it's just waiting to be filled up and close up on something. So then you have the propensity for it to become more discolored because you've damaged it.
Because you've got more metals and minerals and I said, environmental stresses.
That can drive up underneath that cuticle that's been raised and cause it to discolor more. So, okay, so my next question is how do toners work on bleached hair? So like when you're doing the highlighting process for the gray blending, how do the toners work? Do they last a long time? Do they kind of share that process with me?
I think you've got the generic answer, which is 20 minutes development. Therefore, you get 20 shampoos out of a toner.
Okay.
So I know back in the day, people were terrified of toners and would put them on for 30 seconds, you know, like on, off, really, really quick. But actually, you need to do a full development on a toner. And when I speak about a toner is a Demi permanent.
Okay.
Yeah, it is a Demi. But what you're doing with a toner is using it to enhance your hair color. So with the bleach highlights, you lift it up and it's always going to lift yellow. Everyone's hair lifts for an orange yellow stage, a lightning curve. And it's about whatever level of lift you got, a level 8, a level 7, or a level 10, you then enhance or subdue or neutralize using a toner. That when I do my grey blending, I look at their skin color analysis and I'm like, okay, how are we going to complement this person's skin with this new hair? Okay. And I don't want to wash them out if they're an autumn skin color analysis and I go in with a winter kind of toner or icy platinum,
right,
that's not going to sit nicely against someone's skin.
Right.
So toners are used to our advantage as a hairdresser, and it just sits underneath the cuticle of the hair and stains it. It's just staining the bleached hair, white hair. I use a Demi toner on my own hair.
Okay. So can you use a toner like you're talking about, your salon toners, on naturally gray hair? So for instance, if you had somebody that had permanent yellowing and there's no removing it, can they use a toner in the salon?
Yes, to neutralize the yellow, but it doesn't lift as well as a permanent would lift. So toners you have different types of toners. You have an alkaline and an acidic, right? So an alkaline has the ability to shift color. So if it's yellow because there's buildup of product on there, that won't lift it out, but it might neutralize to clean it up. Okay. So I would be more inclined to use the purple masks, the toning masks for something like that instead of a toner. Okay.
Yeah. So that brings me right into the next question is that What do you think about using purple shampoo?
I'm not a fan of purple shampoo because I think it's aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
Most people that would require a purple shampoo have had a lightener used on their hair. So
Okay.
I'm talking about my guests in the salon. They usually have had highlights and they're going to reach for a purple shampoo, but highlighted hair tends to be more fragile, more compromised, sensitive. So they go in with a purple shampoo and it grabs really, really quickly. Their hair is porous and it is absorbing that purple shampoo, which is also a detergent. So it makes the hair quite rough and rugged.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's grabbing onto the purple tones, but can over deposit. And that's where some people are left with a flat, murky looking hair blonde when it's quite dull now because it's no longer as bright and fresh as it used to be. So I'm not a fan of the shampoo, but I would steer my clients into a toning mask. So
Okay.
a silver or a purple toning mask for white hair, blonde hair, and a blue toning mask for anyone sort of brunette that's struggling with brassy tones in their brunette.
Okay. And you're talking about that from the perspective of treating the blended hair, the gray blending.
Coloured hair. Your naturally white hair, again, I would still use a purple or silver mask. I wouldn't use a detergent, the purple shampoos.
Okay. Well, we agree on that one.
Yeah,
I
that is
don't
personal preference.
I don't usually recommend people using purple shampoos. Many of them on the market here in the United States are very drying,
Yeah,
which
aggressive.
again, that's disrupting that cuticle. You're making the hair dry. It becomes damaged. It wants to grab onto more things. So it's like this vicious cycle where you end up with more yellowing because of the thing you were using to treat the yellowing. And so I often recommend that people even just use a purple conditioner where there's no soap in it, there's no surfactant in it, and it can sit on the hair for 5 or 10 minutes, like the length of your shower, rather than just washing it in and washing it out, and you actually get a more even toning experience.
Right.
Right. So since you are in the UK and my followers are in the US or mostly, what brands of color or toners are your favorites to recommend there and possibly that they could find here?
Yeah, I think so many of these are going to be available online, and whether you get them in your supermarket or from a professional salon as well, like everyone will stock something. But some of the ones that I really like, and I'm just going to show you them on my screen here because these, I've got my dirty screen. Fingerprint. These are taken from my e-guide and I've just popped them in there. We've got the Goldwell Silver Conditioning Masks. That's
Okay.
a really nice one for white hair and blonde hair.
Okay.
Silver isn't as strong as purple, so perhaps it's nice to start with a silver and then ease your, because purple could grab if your hair's quite porous. So silver is a really nice one. And then we've got Brass Off. This is it's quite strong.
From Matrix, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a strong one. And that would be designed for somebody, if you're a brunette like me, that's staining your white hair, because I certainly have white hair, but I do have a tendency to get brassy mids and ends. So Brass Off is a really nice conditioning mask. And then Evo is a brand we have here. Do you have cult brands out there?
I don't think so. Let me
Evo
see.
is these toning masks. But what's really nice about Evo is that they do a platinum, a caramel with like a light beige or a light sand. So if you don't want to tone it with a platinum and you're sort of a sandy blondie tone, they do different ones for that. And I think that's a really nice option. You don't always have to go in with a purple or a blue.
Right.
Actually, we could deposit a tone into our conditioner that is going to enhance your blonde hair.
So that is, I don't know if you have overtone in the UK, but we have overtone here.
Right.
And then we have a product line called Conditioner, and they're toning conditioners basically that you can get in almost any color.
Oh, okay. So that's very similar to the.
So that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. That sounds similar. So it's a bit more bespoke, and it would be good. It would be beneficial if your hairdresser has sort of guided you as to which tone to put on.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, a professional opinion, be guided on that.
Right. I think as far as what we've talked about today, a professional is your best advocate, because a lot of this is not something you will be able to do at home on your own, especially when it comes to like baby lowlights and baby highlights and the proper sequence of products. toning and the spacing it out and all that. I think I would want a salon specialist to do it for me rather than
hold your hand while you're doing it and to ask questions. And a lot of my guests, the privilege they have me on WhatsApp. Like, I'm in their pocket. If they've got a concern or a worry or just having a bit of a wobble and feeling a bit anxious, you know, I'm always available to chat with them.
That's really special, Karla, because there's a lot of people that would not make themselves available for that. And I think that that's a really special person that will literally hold your hand through the process, because it's tough. This is not an easy process to go through. And there are a lot of social norms that you're going against. There's a lot of cultural aspects depending on where you live and who you live with and what religion you are or what job you have or whatever, that can make it extraordinarily difficult to get through this process. And if you feel like you've been set adrift by yourself, it makes it even harder. So I think that that's really great that you're there for them that much. So I have this is kind of a long one, so hang on with me while I read this to you. Since some people may not be ready to embrace their silver hair completely yet, or they don't have enough silver to go all the way, would this gray blending technique work well for them for the long term? And what type of color processing should they ask their stylist for?
So gray blending is also seen as future proofing. So, if you're struggling with a little bit of white hair now, you know that genetically you're probably going to develop a little bit more and you're future proofing. So you don't have to go full in and you wouldn't go grey if you haven't got the grey there, because grey blending only works by mimicking your natural white hair. So if you only have a few strands, some of the things you could do is just switch up the type of hair color you're using. So you're preparing your hair for the future when you do have more strands. And that's the bracket I would put myself in, Joli. I have white hair, but I don't have enough to do grey blending. So I've made sure that I use a product, an acidic Demi permanent on my hair, so that I don't get a solid line. I just get a fade out really between my natural and my artificial. And I think if you haven't got enough white hair, then just by working with what you have already and making sure that the products that are being used on your hair isn't setting you up to tie you in to a constant cycle.
Where I got with permanent box dye, where I got stuck there. I just couldn't. I couldn't darken it.
Yeah, you are taught that anyone that has white hair reach for a permanent. Some of the junior stylists that I've worked with recently, and I've sort of said to them, what would you do for this person? They're like, oh, permanent. And they'll go straight in with something Weller colistin that we have in the UK. I'm sure you've got colistin out there. And it's the densest colour out on the market that I know of. And that would give you helmet head.
Yeah.
We call it Lego head in the UK, like Lego hair. It's so dense, but people don't realize that by doing that once or twice, you're setting them up for a lifetime of it unless they make a change.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened to me. My stylist retired, and she had been using Demi permanent on me for years. She had never put permanent hair color on me, and she retired. And she actually, because I knew the process, I had been doing it with her for so long, she sent me product to last me for a couple of more months, and I did it myself for a few more months, and then I had to make a decision on what I could do, because I couldn't get the salon product myself because I wasn't a stylist and licensed. And I ended up using a natural, I mean, it's still got a chemical in it to make it work, but I ended up doing box dye, and I did it for a few years. And the whole time I was just like, I don't like this. I don't like the way this looks. And because I chose a red tone, it was getting very coppery and very metallic looking, and I just lost the desire to do it. I just was like, I can't do this anymore. And I went through some really bad salon experiences trying to correct for it and trying to do something different, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. So I was like, okay, I've just got to stop. I can't deal with this anymore. So I think it really comes down to where you are in your journey. You know, I had several false starts, and I think that that's really normal. I'm sure you have that happen in your own chair, that people come in and they think they're ready for this, and then they kind of go, oh, no, I'm not ready for it.
I have like red flags. So if I notice a red flag at the very beginning, we won't even start the journey.
That's good at that. And you've been doing it long enough to kind of recognize those signs of, I don't think you're ready for this.
Yeah, come back when you're ready. Or some people just want to do it because it's popular on TikTok, right? And then
Yeah.
like, this is not something to play around with. And it's a huge investment for most. It's a big investment.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's not something to play around with. You're in or you're out.
I want to make a little departure here too, just a little bit of training, because I think that there's a lot of misinformation out there about what semi-permanent, demi-permanent, and permanent hair dyes do to gray hair. And I myself have had to educate people on that. Just because it says it's semi-permanent or demi-permanent does not mean that it doesn't permanently stain that white hair. There are a lot of people who misguidedly will color their hair with semi-permanent or demi-permanent, and they're already 6-8 inches of their natural hair grown out, and they stain it permanently, and then they want to bleach that to fix it. And I guess what I would like to ask you as a professional stylist is, what would you recommend people do instead of that?
Read the box and read the instructions. I think people need to understand that semi-permanent is a fashion shade. So if you wanted to put a pink or a peach or a purple through your hair, technically it should just rinse out in 5 shampoos or 10 shampoos, depending on which product you reach for, right? Because it sits on the outside of the cuticle. It sits out here.
So in the United States, that's not true. We do have a difference in the naming of those products and the regulations on what that name means. There are semi-permanent products that are just a notch below demi-permanent, and they will permanently stain.
So our demi-permanent will stain. That's in the hair.
Yeah.
The semi is a fashion shade that can fade away.
Okay, so that must be something that's very different in the UK, that they have a very distinguished line there, because here I've had to help people with that. They put semi-permanent on and it stained permanently. They couldn't get it back off. So I think it really comes down to a test strip, right? Like test your hair and see
under here, but also the condition of your hair here and the condition of your hair here is different, right? So this up here tends to be more porous, could be more, it's probably had more stresses to it. Right. And if it's porous, it's going to grab anything that you put into it.
Right.
It's just a risk. It's a risk, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you're doing a semi because you don't want it to last forever, it's a risk. Don't do it at all.
Yeah, I think you're right there too, because I feel like if there aren't any regulations on those names, as far as that they're actually testing it to see, is it actually semi-permanent? Does it only last 10 washes, or does it actually stain permanently? So my statement is, if it has the word permanent in it, you should assume that it might permanently stain your hair.
Or permanently alter something. Yep. Yeah, and there's no guarantee that it won't, because what it would do to your hair and my hair would be very different.
Right. Because
my explanation to most people online and in my salon is semi-permanent is your fashion shade and sits outside the hair cuticle. A demi-permanent is longer lasting and sits just under the cuticle. And that's with a demi, you don't get a solid coverage. You get that sheer, transparent, stained window sort of coverage.
Right.
And then permanent sits right inside the hair, and that is like a door. It's solid. It's going to stain the hair.
Right.
And that's hard. And that is very hard to shift. Now, you do get some fade in the sunlight, from environmental factors. If you sit in the sun, it will lighten the hair, right? Even permanent color. But that's when you get the brassiness, if you're a brunette anyway. So permanent is permanent. Demi-permanent is still permanent, but it doesn't give you a flat, heavy color. So you can still sort of see some tones in your hair. And I would describe a semi as a fashion shade.
Okay. All right. Well, that brings me to my last question for you, which is, if you had a hack for silver hair and gray hair and white hair, what's your best hack?
Don't use too hot water.
Don't use too hot of water. Okay. Why is that?
Well, you might know better. Too hot water swells the cuticle, like it pushes the cuticle open, right? And anything in your water, and most people's water is metals, minerals, and like hard water. We have a lot of hard water in the UK, and I think that grabs to the hair as the water is trickling through, and it tends to grab down on the ends, and that's what you tend to look at the most when you're playing with your hair at your office desk. So
that's a good one. I don't tend to take very hot showers because I can't handle it on my skin, so I'm very sensitive to that. So I probably wouldn't do it myself, just because I don't set my water that hot. But I do know a lot of people that really like a very, very hot shower, and that's a good piece of advice, is turn that water down while you're washing your hair.
Heat, I think sunscreen, right? Artificial heat from the sun. Your white hair is going to be more prone to, sort of susceptible to damage from the UV rays as well. So always try and put a barrier in your hair. I like a lot of leave-in conditioners, and if you can't afford a leave-in conditioner, just mix conditioner and water in a spray bottle, shake it up, and spritz your hair throughout the day. That will sit as a barrier. Is that right, Joli? Would that
well, there are UV filters for conditioners. There's certain ingredients that are actually UV filters. So I suggest that whatever leave-in you are using is rated for UV protection, so that it's claiming that it has UV protection, which in the US that means it has to have an ingredient in it that provides UV protection. So those are certain types of oils and conditioning agents. So even if you were using a conditioner that had those agents in it and didn't claim UV protection, it could provide some UV protection. But anything coating the hair can provide a little bit of UV protection. If you are just wearing your hair raw, like you just shampoo it, conditioner it, and that's it, you don't put anything else on your hair, you are leaving your hair susceptible to environmental damage, whether it's sun damage, oxidative stress, pollution damage, or whatever. Yeah, you do want to have something on there that will be a barrier against that, just like you do for your skin. You have to put something on there or it won't be protected.
Our hair. It's amazing how many people don't think about our hair. And in the UK, we don't have the sun all year round, right? So I think a lot of guests don't think about buying a UV protection for their hair for the one holiday they're probably going on that year.
And I get consultations for that a lot. I will have someone reach out to me and say, I went on vacation and my hair turned yellow. And it's because they went to some tropical paradise and they coated their skin in sunscreen, but never thought about their hair or their scalp even. And then the damage ensues, and it can happen rather quickly. However, even in the UK, it can happen gradually. You can have that 10 minutes that you sit in your garden every day. That is UV exposure. And over a long period of time, it will still cause an acceleration in that oxidative stress. So that is something to be very mindful of no matter where you are, because we all are exposed to UV rays every day.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right. So I enjoyed this very much, and I'm so glad that you came today to talk to us and share all of your wonderful knowledge and your specialty with us. If you want an in-depth consultation with Karla, could you tell us how people could get in touch with you?
So I am on all social platforms. So if you Googled Karla Osborne Hair, my website will come up, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Okay. Ideally, if you want to approach me through my website is the best bet, because I get lots of DMs and things get lost. But if you genuinely want to have a chat with me and take me up on my virtual consultations, an application form for that can be found on my website.
Okay, I will get all those links from you and I will put them in the description notes for the video. And if anybody wants to look at those, all of that will be in the description box below as always. Yeah. And thank you for joining us today. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel at this point, please do so now, because we would love to see you next time. Until then, shine on.